And now, without further ado, it is my pleasure to introduce you to our speakers, Scott Provence and Dr. Carmen Simon. Scott is a health tech leader and content developer whose print and web-based curricula have served millions annually across the world. Dr. Simon is a cognitive neuroscientist. She helps organizations apply brain science to craft messages that capture attention and drive lasting impact. As a keynote speaker, consultant, and researcher, she delivers science-backed insights on how the brain processes and retains information. Scott and Carmen, we are super excited to have you here today. And with that, I'm going to hand it over.
All right. Thank you so much for having us. Like Avery mentioned, I work at ELB Learning. We provide software, professional services, learning strategy to help businesses really maximize their potential. So everything from gamification to VR to AI consulting to help you create smarter, more effective work environments. So specifically, I consult with companies on their AI strategy, which is why when I saw Dr. Simon's AI versus human design study, I thought we have to get this information into the world of L&D. So I'm going to stop talking and let Carmen explain her amazing self and amazing work. I think you'll really enjoy it.
Thank you so much, and welcome everyone. It is exciting to talk about AI, especially as it pertains to content design. I've asked this research question that you see here on the screen because AI is now capable to fill up a canvas, as metaphorical as that can be. That can be a slide that you have, that could be a video that you're producing, that could be a PDF file that you're creating, and any other canvases in between in absolute seconds. From code to creativity, the journey is not all that long these days. And I've been intrigued by AI's bold entry into the design world when a while back, a French agency commissioned the creation of the first AI-generated painting, which you now see here on my screen. I'm wondering, and we're monitoring the chat box as you're joining us, how much do you think this sold for? Use the chat box and take a guess. Whenever I ask this question, some people say, whatever it was too much. This was a French agency that commissioned the project, and it was the first time that we were really seeing this transition from code to canvas being done by AI. And I see a few of your ranges. This was the price, so many of you were fairly close. I like how some of you were going for the millions, so that may also attest to the power that the AI is starting to have in terms of what it can create. If we're thinking that some people might be willing to pay that much. I like where you're going for the dollar price. So notice how we have quite a wide spectrum, which is why I'm so excited that you are at a session like this, because it can go in many directions and it can go to extremes. And AI can produce not only things in one style, but it can now produce artistic and design related things in multiple styles. So for instance, if you're taking a cat and you wanted to reproduce this in the style of iconic artists, you would like a Picasso style. A few seconds later, you have that. If you want a Rembrandt style, a few seconds, you will have that. If you want a Van Gogh style, a few seconds, you can have that. So now we're starting to be impressed by the range, the artistic range that the AI tools can have, and also by its impact in various fields that are related to design. Take, for instance, fashion design. There's a company lately that has been using AI tools to reinvent and reimagine the way that they're doing fashion by applying various AI tools and technologies to see if they can play a little bit more with the styles and the fabrics. Do you guys remember Frankenstein, the book? AI was tasked a while back to recreate or reimagine the cover. And technically, it got it correct in the sense that it has the darkness and it has a lighting going on. And if you're still talking about design, AI tools were also tasked to invent not just a new wine, but also create its label, which you can see here. And quite a few critics agreed that the AI tools were indeed able to create something that was drinkable and palatable and fairly appealing in terms of design, would you say? And of course, since we're talking about books, how could we not mention just book writing and generating images for in general? In this project, this author spent all of one weekend to produce a children's book. And the AI tool was able to generate the text and the storytelling threads throughout that text, generate obviously the images and the visual theme that tied everything together. So of course, this person thought they were earning bragging rights because in such a short amount of time, you can create a complete project. However, is it a perfect project? Definitely not. I'm sure that as you've been reading and getting close to these AI tools that have been used specifically for design, we know some limitations and imperfections that they have. For instance, the hand creation doesn't really quite cut it, where the hand here looks more like claws. If we go back to that impact of AI on fashion, for instance, yeah, sure, it can have some creativity in terms of some technology that can be used, some different styles that perhaps are a bit more progressive. But you compare that to a human fashion designer, like take, for instance, Alexander McQueen. If you are intrigued by the fashion world, you might know that name. He is making a name for himself because of his knowledge of the materials and how they can be combined, these fabrics that are very intriguing when positioned in specific combinations. His cultural preferences. He has a propensity to pick on historic women figure, like for instance, Joan of Arc, and he's looking for portraying them in various ways where he might use chainmail as part of the fashion design, and he might use these giant headpieces that look like armor because he wants to exhibit this notion of vulnerability and strength at the same time. There's just so much emotion and depth to his designs, and the same for the original Frankenstein cover. If you're looking at the original one, you will see how much more depth and emotion that one has, because it captures the darkness and the construction and destruction juxtaposition at the same time, to where the book cover becomes almost as critical as the work itself and the masterpiece in itself. Speaking of masterpieces, if we're really to analyze closely that AI generated painting and you were to zoom in, you will see how the painting contains this hollow combination of dots, and even his eyes are just this empty stare where there is no life, there is no meaning behind that stare anyway. And if you're talking about prices, if you're looking at one of the most expensive masterpieces ever sold, we go to Leonardo da Vinci. I'm sure that many of you are familiar with this portrait. And that would have so much artistry and, of course, historical significance behind it that, of course, we are willing to pay a little bit more. And notice how you're recognizing some themes such as emotion and depth and meaning. I'm reminded of that movie Up. Have you guys seen that movie Up a while back? It was the animated movie, and if you're like me, you're just crying your eyes out in the first 2 minutes. Yes, the tearjerker. Because how could you not? You see this couple all throughout their life journey, and through that life journey, those chairs that endure that life journey are starting to capture some of that emotion and depth and meaning, and that is the human design. Now, of course, we have to be fair and say, is human design always perfect? Well, not really. If you're looking at these kinds of examples, it's like, really, those are your best calculations for that piece? And do you remember those Samsung phones that started catching on fire because they may have rushed to market too fast, and in the process may have skimped a little bit on quality? And speaking of fire, one of the iconic buildings in London, the way that the top of it had been built and the way that the glass was set and the angle of the glass was set, it was unfortunately capturing the sun rays at such an angle that it was starting to melt cars that were parked across the street. So we have to be very humble, because on the AI side, sure, we can see some advancements and we are in awe of what some of the AI tools can do. On the human side, we also see that combination of emotion and meaning and depth, but also we have some mishaps as a species. So which way will the winning match go? Is it on the human side or is it on the AI side? Before I share the practical guidelines from a neuroscience study that I completed that asked that question, I'll pause here for a moment. So Scott and the rest of the team, do you have any points of views before I share the guidelines from the neuroscience study?
I can certainly tell you which one I'm hoping for, but I'm eager to see if others in the chat are guessing, yeah, where the neuroscience would take us.
Yes, we are really rooting for humanity, and of course, as we're making some peace with our AI colleagues, we can continue looking to see what are its merits, what are its advantages, and I like your responses here in the chat box. So here's how the study unfolded. When I look to see what does the human brain do when it's faced with these AI designs. When I say human brain, in our neuroscience studies, we typically recruit from B2B organizations because that's where we operate in our business. So we want to be able to generalize those findings to that population. When I mention neuroscience, what I mean is these tools that you see here on the screen. So on people's scalps, I place an EEG cap, and through the electrodes that you see there, I'm able to capture the brain waves that get generated in reaction to stimulation. So in this case, he's watching a sales presentation that was introducing a software application that would promise some enterprises that should they use that application, they can better manage their data, see some patterns. Now, ironically, it was kind of alluding to the use of AI, but this was for data purposes, for data analysis purposes. On people's chest, I place an electrode so that I can capture an electrocardiogram signal. Better to have presentations with a pulse. And sometimes we see it, sometimes metaphorically, we don't see it. On the computer itself, there's an eye tracker, and sometimes I ask people to wear the actual glasses. And the reason for that is because typically you look to where you think. So we want to capture that connection between visual attention and some cognitive processes. And on his wrist and fingers, you're noticing another device that's called a galvanic skin response. These sensors here are enabling me to capture how the skin changes in reaction to stimulation. Because when you do have a reaction to a stimulus, take for instance those chairs in the movie Up, whether it's positive or negative, whether you're jumping up for joy or you're crying your eyes out like we were for that movie, doesn't matter, but the conductivity of your skin is different. So that's what I'm able to capture with that tool. I like a combination of these tools and not just one, because sometimes you might be reading in a journal some eye tracking study that says we are noticing that people are looking more in this area versus in this other area. Well, if that's all you're using, that you still wouldn't be able to make logical inferences, meaning that you won't know if people are looking here because of interest or because of confusion. And the only reason why you would want to use biometric tools like this is because you want to bypass self-reports. Because otherwise, what other research methods do you have when you want to discover what attracts people's attention or what keeps them motivated or what is it that they like or they don't like? You could ask them, you can send them a survey, you can ask them after the fact, you could have focus groups, and all those are great. But that means you're relying on people's self-reports, and often those are not reliable. Sometimes people will overplay or downplay an emotion. Sometimes they'll tell you what they think you want to hear. Besides, emotions and thoughts are so fast and fleeting that the only time you can ever get the raw reaction from the brain and the body to a stimulus is the millisecond that it happens. So those are the tools that I use to set up a neuroscience study. And of course, because this was about AI design versus human design in a commercial context, such as a sales presentation, I first had to conduct a pilot test to make sure that what we considered to be as a recognizable AI design, other people considered it to be recognizable too. So for example, if you had been part of that pilot test, you would have seen these pairs that look like this on my screen. So as you're looking in here, what would you go for, A or B, in terms of which one was created by AI? So notice how most of you, with a few exceptions, but most of you are going for B, and indeed that was what we had used for AI. And this is the prompt that you see here to the left. So notice how for the majority of the responses that you see here, we can attest that B indeed would have been recognized as an AI design. And the same in here, now that you're kind of catching on to things, you can see how there is a difference. So if I had asked a similar question for here, I'm confident that most of you will also say that B indeed was an AI design versus the corresponding human design. So once we had this inter-rater reliability score, which has to be 80% or higher, by the way, in research to make sure that your assumptions are correct, then we can do the neuroscience study, because we could say in this condition, what we consider to be AI design, indeed the brain recognized as AI design. So I had included in the study 3 experimental groups. Group 1 saw the sales presentation that I had shared about this predictive analytics, where we had presented human design and also the presenter was human. So we went human all the way. The section in the middle, the group in the middle, saw the AI design that he had just confirmed previously, plus still the human presenter. So now we had a combination. And then group 3, we thought, well, why not go AI all the way? In the name of efficiency, which is one of the reasons why you would welcome these tools into your repertoire, let's just have this combination. So that group saw an AI design plus an AI presenter, because these days you can have all sorts of avatars, you can train them with a human voice. In fact, you almost have to kind of do a double take, like, is that human or is that really an AI? People caught on to things that, like that, just like they're catching on to designs being done by AI. You have that uncanny valley type of situation, but ultimately, to detect plastic very quickly. So we knew that that was design that was created by AI all the way in terms of the slides and also in terms of the presenter. We decided not to include a 4th group, because if you really had to be fair, there should have been a condition that had the AI design plus the human presenter. But we're very careful how we're choosing these groups, because that wouldn't really be a feasible solution to then recommend to organizations, would it? Because if you still have the human design, which theoretically would take a little bit more effort, why would you ever pair that with an AI presenter? That combination did not make business sense to us. So that's the reason you're not seeing that 4th group. So now that we have these 3 experimental groups, let's look at emotion first. So this is what I mean by affective variables. From a neuroscience perspective, whenever I study emotion, I look at 2 variables that are at the foundation of all emotional states. I know this is a strong statement to make, to say 2 things that are the foundation of everything when it comes to emotion. But it's true, if you think about how the brain and body process and experience emotion, you have to think about how much people enjoy an experience and how alert and awake they are during that experience. So here's an emotional circumplex. For those of you in the business of L&D or psychology in general, you may be familiar with this inclination for this emotional circumplex. But what's new for us is that on top of the circumplex, we're able to place a combination of the EEG and ECG signal and be able to detect at any moment where people were, and also as an aggregate throughout the presentation where people were in terms of their emotions. And notice how for the human design, human presenter, that's where people are at their most alert and they like that condition, versus the more stressed out are the people witnessing the AI design, AI presenter. So already you're seeing how some practical guidelines are starting to emerge, because we're definitely advocating against going AI all the way in terms of design and presentation. Through some of the brain waves that I captured, we're also able to calculate a mind-wandering score. And I was noticing that the more you invite the AI tools in this commercial context, the more the mind-wandering rate is starting to increase. So human design, human presenter, the lowest mind-wandering score. Of course, the brain still wanders. From an evolutionary perspective, at some point we have to go away, make sense of some things, or still sort some things out in our own minds. It's impossible to have a 0 mind-wandering score when it comes to business context. So notice as the AI is making its presence known, we are also inviting a bit more of the mind-wandering state. As you're looking at the EEG signal, depending on where it occurs in the brain, you're seeing here some dots. Those are a representation of each electrode. So this is a view from the top. And we know where to look inside the brain and in which region to calculate what's called a eureka effect. That's that aha moment that you get when you're thinking, oh, I didn't think this was so. And I was noticing that messaging wise, all 3 groups experienced a eureka effect. However, the strongest one was indeed for the human design, human presenter condition. And of course, when you have much more arousal, when you have positive valence, when you have less mind wandering, you have more of an aha moment that will eventually translate into long-term memory. In your professions, you must aspire at long-term memory because the brain does not make any decisions or any behavioral changes based on what it forgets. It makes decisions and behavioral changes based on what it remembers. And notice that as we're inviting the AI colleagues into our work, the memory scores tend to decrease. So the highest memory score was for that combination of human design, human presenter. So yay for humanity, at least so far. So now that you have the general findings, if you're after creating memories with human design, which is my proposition for today, here are some reminders as to why I'm making that, that guideline to be so, and I'm sharing it with you. And I also have 4 additional practical guidelines I want to share. But before I go to those, I want to stop here for a moment. Scott or Avery, if you're seeing some questions in the chat box or some reactions, or if you have some reactions, I'd love to know.
It's been great, and yeah, great chatter going on in the chat on the side here. We did have one I don't want to say logistical, but one question on some of the tools used. I know you mentioned Midjourney for the AI images. Do you know the name of the tool used for creating the AI presenters?
We use Midjourney for AI design because at the time that was the most popular. So this is about 6 months ago.
Yeah.
And for the AI presenter, we used, I want to say, Synthesia.
Oh, okay. Yep. Perfect. Great. And then, yeah, one other coming in. Did your research consider human design presenters in a virtual setting versus a live or in-person setting? That'd be a whole other, yeah, whole other.
I like where you're going, and
Sure.
I did do a study. We should get back in touch, and I'll share results from that one. Just as soon as the pandemic was kind of tapering off, and people were coming back face to face a little bit more frequently. And in that neuroscience study, I had used what's called hyperscanning, meaning that I'm scanning not one brain at a time to show them something, then the next person comes in, you show them something. I'm studying pairs. And the reason for hyperscanning, you can study 2 or more people, is because the presence of somebody else's brain induces neural activity changes in your own brain. This is why if you ever watch that movie Up, we've been talking about it all along, you're seeing the chairs, by yourself versus with somebody else, notice how your reactions might be different. Or have you ever noticed your own behavior if you're watching a sitcom by yourself and how differently you laugh and much more when you're with somebody else? Yep. So you want to see how the presence of another induces changes in your own brain. And in that study, I had asked, are there any differences when people hear the exact same message, but in one condition, they heard that message virtually, very much like we're doing right now. In another condition, they heard the message coming from somebody face to face. So they're physically in the same room with the presenter. They were also hearing the exact same message over the phone. Do you guys remember the good old conference call? Like we'd all hop on a conference call. You didn't see anybody, but you just hear the voice. The phone is still alive, even despite all of these amazing technologies. And then the 4th group, which was what really I was after, was a hybrid condition, because that was becoming popular. Like some people were face to face with the presenter and some people were joining in via Zoom. Don't you hate it when somebody does that to you, by the way? You're going to a location and you're prepared for a face-to-face interaction and suddenly say, oh, but all these 3 people have to call in. Right. And now you have to make hybrid happen. Yeah. Which one of the 4 modalities do you guys think performed the worst? So you have face-to-face, you have phone, you have virtual, and you have hybrid.
I would guess hybrid too. Yeah, well, it looks like our chat's funding as well.
Everybody's on it, yes. So be cautious about that one. And the virtual, though, performed the best, ironically so. And this is the reason I'm sharing that study, because you're asking the question, what would this be different? How would this be different if it was a face-to-face environment? Yeah. I would love to do that study because in that category, way back then, it didn't perform so well. I think maybe we had been used to virtual for so long that now it was just like a thing to be. Also, I think that in virtual modalities, you are able to control focus a little bit more. Like even right now, we are not in the same room, but notice how with very few techniques, I love annotation, by the way, I can make sure that you're focusing on one area. Like I can say, look, when you're using the human design, you can aspire at lower mind wandering. You can aspire at a stronger eureka effect. So I also wonder if that direction of attention played a difference versus in face-to-face, the brain can now have an expanded horizon for distractions. I can look at the presenter, but then there are some things happening in the room. Maybe somebody walks in. Mind wandering, though, is prevalent in all of them. So be very humble that just because you're face-to-face, it doesn't mean that your brain is fully there.
Yeah. That's amazing. A couple other questions coming in, but I don't want to distract because I do want to see the other results that you can show. But a couple of the other questions are talking about the uniqueness of AI voices versus voices in the absence of a virtual presenter, or maybe even the possibility of presenter accents causing biases. Someone in a regional area or local area being attuned to more nuances of vocal presentations.
It's possible. Don't we have that assumption that you have a British accent, your IQ already goes up by 10%?
There you go.
That would be an interesting study to do. I haven't done that one.
Yeah.
We're also very cautious about research questions that we're asking, because if we're asking a research question, that means you have to be prepared for the results, which can go in either direction. Let's just say that you might contrast a North American accent, somebody from Europe, somebody from Asia, and one of those will show to be the strongest. Are you then prepared to act on those results?
Right.
So it's good to talk about some of these theories, but then we also have to think about practice and inviting them into our repertoire. So be very cautious. Not that they wouldn't be interesting, but just be prepared for those results.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much for letting us pause for questions, but eager to keep seeing what you've got.
Yeah, let's look at these 4 guidelines that I figured would be beneficial to all of you listening to this, because yes, neuroscience can be fascinating. It's nice to peek underneath the human skull and understand a few things that are happening. But then what do you do with this, and how do you apply this to your own work? So here are 4 branches that I'm seeing these results that are in favor of humanity and human design going. The first one, you have to ask, like, why is it really that condition, human design, human presenter, may have performed better? I suspect one of the reasons is because what we visualized was relatable compared to what the AI visualized given a fairly fair prompt. So for example, at one point in the presentation, which was about predictive analytics, we were saying that be cautious of your organization's data because it can very frequently be fragmented. So you're dealing with silos that don't talk to each other. And for us to visualize this notion of siloed data, we are saying, imagine you're in a jeans store and you have some jeans that come from this region, they are of this kind, they're of this kind. And perhaps if they're not connected, then it's very difficult to have a unified buying experience. It's no different with some of this the siloed data. Well, when we get to the AI prompt in order to show this notion of silos, notice how it visualized that aspect here on the right-hand side. Do you see how the experience is not so relatable when you're looking at one design versus another? So as you're pondering your own content, wonder, am I on the right track to visualize something that the brain can very quickly relate to? On another screen in the same presentation, we were talking about having to make decisions in split seconds, in sub-second type of context. So notice how we had the rain, and then that turned into fog, and then it turned into more torrential rain for visualizing that fairly abstract concept. Whereas if you're looking at the comparable AI design for the exact same message, do you see how less relatable it is? We find it a lot easier to relate to rain and fog than we do to this abstract design that you're seeing here on the right-hand side. So always ponder as you're helping your audience's brains understand something, how familiar and comforting something is. I would like to ask that question of the audience too, like what do you find something that's familiar and comforting? Like when you see it, you're thinking, okay, I got that. I've seen it before. As a result, my brain is a bit in a more comfortable position. So the content itself doesn't always have to be comforting, but at least it gives you the comfort that you're understanding things and you know what to pay attention to.
It's really interesting. It makes me think of, again, an AI generated image might be a mug just by itself, and the human design element might put the little tag of a tea bag hanging out of it as the little detail that shows this is a comfort morning coffee thing. So yeah, that idea of tapping into that more human element of what is a comfort experience versus more of a generic experience that might be read in multiple ways.
Yeah, I like where you're going. And see, already we don't even have to show a PowerPoint slide about what you just described. We can picture it. It's familiar, it's comfortable and comforting in the case of the tea bag. And I see other elements here, and thank you for suggesting these. You're going to the ocean, you're going to a bookstore or a bookshelf, you're going to the beach, you're seeing the champagne and not just the champagne, but the bubbles in the champagne, if you pay attention to that little detail that can also be relatable. So as we were being talking about that movie Up that I think may have left a memory trace on our minds, I was intrigued when I was researching a little bit more about how the authors created those beautiful designs. You guys remember that waterfall that eventually he came across, and some other elements in nature that as he starts his journey in her memory, he's starting to see and experience. All of those had been created based on the producer's physical experience. They really went to South America and they searched for these locations. And when they started drawing things, then those came from something that was relatable to them. It wasn't something that they just sat behind the computer and dreamed up or asked an AI tool to design and dream up based on millions of other people's experiences. It was those people's experiences. And I think that makes a difference when you visualize something, because it comes from then a more relatable spot versus something that is totally abstracted out and disembodied from something that would appear as if it was human. So I ask this question in a very tangible way. How relatable is your content? It doesn't have to be relatable on every single segment, because at some point, as you'll see in a moment, we do have to talk about some abstract concepts and some things that are not immediately available to the senses. But the more relatable you make something, the stronger people will be able to connect with you, and then you'll get to these variables over here. Any other impressions or suggestions before I share the next three?
No, this is fantastic. There's been some great comments going on in the chat too. Someone brought up a point of designing, again, from a neuroscience point of view or not, but designing learning around experiences that are tailored to different personality traits, what we call it the big five, or some of these other ideas. Is it worth, or segmenting out even, or maybe just even focusing on the more generic human experiences in general? I'm not sure.
It's not impossible to make something tailored in the world of neuroscience. If you wanted to get yourself in trouble, especially if you worked in the academia, you would mention two words that would plague you forever. One would be culture, and the other one would be personality traits.
Interesting.
But more recently, however, because we have more advanced tools to study the brain, we have been able to find some neural markers for some of the big five traits. So now, and same for culture. By the way, I did a neuroscience study where I was looking at how different business brains from 9 different cultures were processing complex content versus simple content. So we're starting to account for those two plaguing words a lot more because of these tools. And I wouldn't dissuade you from looking into some connections between personality traits then and the way that you construct some materials, because now we have a more solid foundation behind at least a few of them. So do a little bit more research, and at least if you are going that route, because you'll make it a little harder for yourself, because now you have to create multiple learning paths, right? But at least associate them with those traits that have been indeed then linked to some neural markers. Right. Thank you for that question. It's I think it will make us be a bit more persistent in making progress in some elements that we used to dismiss so easily, like don't even go there, and now we can.
Yep. Very cool.
I also want to mention, since we're talking about abstract versus concrete thinking and approach to design, another reason why I suspect that the human design did so much better than the AI is because in the way that we had used the visuals, at least the way that the humans had created, we were meeting this notion of concreteness fading. And you're seeing this definition for what that means. So as you're approaching your content, you're starting with something that's specific. We were mentioning that relatability factor. And then as you go through those specifics, you can abstract things out because you have given the brain a concrete foundation to start with. And then some abstract thinking can happen. So if you're looking at sequences in the presentation that we had used in this neuroscience study, for that siloed information, you went to the gene store. That was concrete and very specific. Then we went, speaking of concrete and specific, to the specific screenshot from the software that these people were promoting, then to a very concrete customer example. So they're talking about being able to tease out of a database some natural questions like, how am I doing with car parts for North America? So they were giving the example of Jaguar that was using this type of approach to their databases and making sure that they can find information that was relevant and not having to abide just by some abstract rows and columns. So you see how, and then you're abstracting it out in the sense of don't have the siloed data, use this approach instead. But for the AI design, we stayed abstract all the way because that's the best that the AI can do on those prompts. It's like, this was the image. Then you moved on for flipping your perspective around how to look at data. Then, yeah, sure, we gave the Jaguar example. That's the image that it produced in some screenshots. So you got a little bit more concrete in there. But if you stay abstract for too long, at some point, you're imposing so much lack of understanding on someone that they are likely to withdraw. Same in here, if you remember the rain. So we went to the rain and the fog that got even more intense. And then we went to JP Morgan Chase and looked at how they're using that piece of software to avoid fraud. Whereas for here, it was abstract, and not all that much more concrete. So consider this concreteness fading where you're thinking, do I have something that people can relate to and is available to the senses, like it's physically almost concrete, like this is not even a metaphor. And then you can abstract it out and impose a bit more effort on the brain. And I'm all for the effort on the brain, by the way, because I want to share this third guideline. One other reason why I suspect that this human design performs so much better is because we're avoiding this. What do I mean by this? I know that in your profession, you might be already familiar with this notion of perceptual fluency, meaning that you're offering the brain something that is fairly simple, easy to understand. As a result, the brain welcomes it because given the brain the choice to think or not to think by default, what do we want to, what be drawn to? We don't want to exert that much cognitive energy. But at some point, if you want engagement and as a result, memory, you have to make people think a little bit more. So if I'm looking at the human design for this notion of that came up in the presentation, for instance, they were saying the sampling makes big data small. So we showed one piece of lettuce and then we went to the entire field of lettuce versus if we looked at this one, because it's the exact same message. So we're not changing the words in any way, but that one kind of gives you the notion of, yeah, I got it. So sampling makes big data small. So scale massively without sampling was that their value proposition. Yeah, sure, I got that. There isn't much more depth to the ones that you're seeing on the right compared to the ones on the left. It's like, oh, I see what you mean because we went from this small thing to this large thing. Yet again, connected to what we're talking about. It's relatable, it's familiar, but it does make you think. So as you reflect on your own content, I advocate for not babying people's brains too much. Sometimes we err on the side of perceptual fluency to a fault. We simplify things. By the way, the brain synchronizes better with that which is complex, not all the time with that which is simple. After a while, simplicity can be a snoozer. So I'll share one final guideline before we can stop and take some more questions at the end of the session. I also suspect that one of the reasons that human design did so much better is because of these micro surprises. And I'm offering the definition here on the screen in terms of what do I really mean by these micro surprises. You have these very small segments that will take you off of a predictable path. Your brain would have expected something to happen and something else happens instead, but in a pleasant way. Remember how valence was positive for the human design, human presenter condition. So I'll give you an example, speaking of concreteness. Where did these micro surprises come from? Well, when the human design things, the composition is different. So notice if you're going to that field of lettuce, you saw how much there's happening, and notice how you have that piece of lettuce that's right there in the center. It is circled in some way. There are some additional decorative elements that are happening. We had to be fair though and give the AI a template. So that's why you're seeing some elements that are repeated, because if you are using indeed some AI tools, perhaps your marketing team or some department of sorts will have created some elements to put your AI designs into. So that was consistent. But do you see how much more sophisticated the composition is when it comes to the human design versus the AI pictures? The AI is only going to give you, at least for now, these straight edge images. And of course, you can play with some resolution and with some orientation, like you can have some landscape design or portrait orientation, but you still have to manipulate that in some way to attract attention and sustain engagement. Same for animation. If the AI only gives you one thing and you have a template, well, you put some text, you insert that image, and then off you go. For the human design, we really amped it up in terms of how the elements are flowing into each other. Like in here, we're talking about fragmented data, and you saw how there's some things that are moving. Whereas in the AI design, there isn't really much that you can do. You have the image, you have the text, and maybe you can apply some animation between the two of them. But that's all there is, because the composition is not sophisticated enough. Then there isn't much to animate. Same for the typography. You may have seen even in my presentation, we're very careful about how we present some words, because words in themselves can become images. For the AI design, if you're going after time and efficiency, it's very likely that all you have is some text on the left, some image on the right, or the opposite in terms of layout, and that's all there is. There isn't any kind of micro surprise in terms of how you're playing with the text that can indeed then become an image. So that's all you can see here in terms of tangible guidelines. I advocate that as you are seeing these results from the neuroscience study, any of these that you're noticing here can give you some advantage in terms of getting people to pay attention, getting people to approach your content versus withdraw from it, getting people to not mind wander at least as much, and having that stronger eureka effect.
This was so cool to see, and I feel like, yeah, there's already all sorts of different threads we could go down. I know in just a couple of minutes here. Yeah, keep the chat open for other questions that come in. When you mentioned again, whole new topic. When you mentioned micro surprises, can you talk a little bit more about? I've heard the term often Broca's area, and kind of that being the bodyguard guide to, you know, like what something is going to get past just the noise. Is that something, an area that you interact with a lot or have worked with?
It's an interesting brain region, and if you're looking at how the brain processes language, how it interprets it, how it understands it, then sure, those would be areas that would be interesting to
Gotcha.
study. For us, for neuroscience, and by the way, if you want to stay in touch, I'm including my email address here on the screen. Come and join me. There is this community that I'm running where I display some of these neuroscience findings and also some of these designs. I'm very particular about how design happens for the business brain, because even for Broca, you're mentioning Broca's areas, even as you're thinking about design, what is design but a combination of images, a combination of text, the two put together. Now you can create some more movement, perhaps you have a video, and all of that can translate into some sort of comprehension. Does the brain understand what you have to say? If we understand what we have to say, you're increasing the chances of some memories being formed, because now I'm able to pay attention a little bit longer. I'm able to say, I will look here a little bit more, versus I don't get any of this. So therefore, I'm going to multitask a little bit. Therefore, I can get more easily distracted. So do get closer to what the design entails, and stay in touch, because if you have attention and memory, you're more likely to have behavioral change.
Yeah. Amazing. Well, thank you so much for sharing all of this. Again, I feel like each one of these we could spend a whole day on, and appreciate you sharing your email. I put mine in the chat too. If people have questions, we can collect and send out more. But yeah, Avery, I'll turn it over to you, and just thank you again, Carmen, just from me as well, and I'm sure everyone on the screen too.
Thank you, everyone. Please stay in touch.
Yeah, thank you both. This was an incredible session. Thank you, Dr. Simon and Scott, for being here. And thank you to our audience for engaging in the chat so much. It's been really great to see. And with that, I am going to close this out. So I would like to invite you all to take about a 15-minute break or so. And up next, we will have Shalani and Rajesh joining us from ComLab India for their session, How to Choose the Right AI to Optimize and Automate L&D. So in just a moment, I will end this session and you can join our next session by returning to the event lobby and going to the session tab. Again, thank you, Dr. Simon and Scott, for your time today, and we'll see you all soon.
Thanks, everyone.